Great rewards don't wait, so why should you? Through the Invigor Book and Buy Grower program, you could earn a $30 per bag rebate when you book all of your Invigor hybrid canola by November 14th. Talk to your retailer. Terms and conditions apply.
It's time for RealAg Radio on Rural Radio Channel 147 on Sirius XM. RealAg Radio and RealAgriculture.com is your home for insight and analysis of the issues that are impacting your farm business. Let's get real and get connected with RealAg Radio. Welcome to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147 at Sirius XM. Shaun Haney, your host here on this Friday edition of the show. Thanks so much, everybody, for making RealAg Radio and Rural Radio 147 a big part of your workday. And today we got a RealAg Issues Panel. Tyler McCann of CAPI, Lyndsey Smith, Kelvin Heppner of RealAgriculture, breaking down the biggest issues of the week. And it's been another one of those weeks. August has not been a slow one when it comes to the news. We'll have all of their thoughts and insights, as well as probably some bonus as well today for those of you that listen to the RealAg Radio podcast. We've also got Anne Wasko here from the Gateway Livestock Exchange for a beef market update to provide her perspective as we head into September and really the heart of the fall run for the cattle industry. How are things going from a trade perspective as well as domestic demand? And we'll have that and the prices and just a whole lot more. Always love chatting with Anne Wasko. If you have any feedback on today's program, you can send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. You can also call that RealAg feedback line, 855-776-6147. Also can tell you, RealAg on the weekend that is heard across the Chorus Radio Network in Alberta, as well as Ralco in Saskatchewan. We also podcast the show as well. RealAg on the weekend this weekend will have Saskatchewan Minister of Trade and Export, Minister Warren Kading will be with me to talk about all things trade from Saskatchewan's point of view. So make sure you check out RealAg on the weekend here this weekend. Okay, let's take a break. When we come back, we got Anne Wasko, Gateway Livestock Exchange, standing by right after this.
Ever hear that good things come to those who wait? Well, we think it's more like great rewards come to those who book their Invigor hybrid canola early. Through the Invigor Book and Buy Grower program, you could earn a $30 per bag rebate when you book all your Invigor needs by November 14th. Speak with your local retailer about eligible hybrids. Terms and conditions apply. Book early. Come out ahead.
If you're involved in the agriculture industry, it's important to stay informed on all the latest issues affecting your business. At RealAgriculture.com, we offer fast, reliable news, information, and insights to help you keep on top of all of the latest in Canadian agriculture. Visit RealAgriculture.com and sign up for our free daily newsletter covering everything from news, agronomy, animal agriculture, and much more. Visit RealAgriculture.com/subscribe today.
I'm Lyndsey Smith, host of The Agronomist, and I want to thank you for tuning in for over 200 episodes of our beloved little program. Join me Monday nights, 8 p.m. Eastern on YouTube for our live and interactive agronomy Q&A. Each week, our guest panel will handle some of your toughest agronomic questions live, streaming on YouTube, Facebook, X, and RealAgriculture.com. Tune in Monday nights or go to realagriculture.com/agronomist and sign up for our email notifications and don't miss an episode.
I don't know if there's a more exciting place to be right now than in the cattle markets. We'll get to that in a second. But with deep roots in agriculture, M&P helps farm businesses make confident financial decisions from planning to growth. Their advisors are here to support your success. Learn more by going to mmp.ca. I spoke of the cattle markets, and when we do that, we, of course, talk to the one, the only, Anne Wasko of the Gateway Livestock Exchange for this week's beef market update. And how are we doing?
I'm good, and there is nowhere else you want to be than in the beef market right now. It is absolutely amazing.
It is amazing. It's mind-bending. It's really made a lot of, for a lot of us that follow this very closely, it continues to present I guess, push the limits of what we expected to happen or what was possible of happening.
Mm-hmm.
Give us the price update here. Where are we in the U.S.? Then we'll floor our way to Canada.
Don't ever say never, because every time we think, oh, well, we're getting to a certain point on the calendar where highs should be in, here we are at the end of the August making new highs in both the U.S. and Canada. So in the South, Texas, Kansas, 1 to 2 higher is what we're calling the trade right now, 241 to 242. And in the North, pretty quiet still, but mostly looking steady at around that 245. And just again, business is, so we're going to have a higher weekly average again this week. The cutout, that beef market coming into this long weekend for Labor Day in both countries, closed higher again last night, 414.40. Now that's $6.50 higher than last week. Last week saw a big jump as well. So there's obviously been great action and buying activity heading into the long weekend. The select is back about 28.50, and it's kind of been in that range for a bit. And, it hasn't just been one item that's driven this cutout higher. We've got strength in the rib and the chuck primals leading to this, as well as the lean trim, that hamburger market that we've talked so much about. So we're getting support from everywhere as we head into Labor Day. Now, again, if I'm a betting woman or a market analyst, after Labor Day, the cutout tends to take a bit of a breather. So I'm going to lean there. But I said that a month ago, too. And it's proved wrong. So anyways, from a seasonal perspective, we should see one of the things with the stronger cutout, we've seen packer margins improve. So kill's been bigger this week heading into the long weekend. And that often is kind of a signal for, maybe a break in prices, but we'll see. The other U.S. news I just wanted to touch on was last week, U.S. cattle on feed report for August the 1st. 2% fewer cattle on feed than a year ago. Both placements and marketings were down 6%. So that's kind of where we see really a difference regionally, with that southern border still closed for Mexican feeder imports. The big declines in on-feed numbers are happening in those southern states, Texas, Oklahoma. And in the northern states, Nebraska and whatnot, we're seeing on-feed numbers increase. So really a regional difference going on, but nationally down 2%. So crazy times.
Yeah. And I guess when we look at a big part of this is the supply questions. And in Canada, I guess we are seeing pockets where we're seeing a retention of heifers, but it's not exactly like broad in nature. It's if you pick on certain spots, you're going to see some positive signs, but it's not that case broadly across the country.
No, I don't think so. And first of all, from a timing perspective here, we did get, sorry, Shaun, before we talk about the July 1 inventory report, because we had new highs in Canada for prices too, I do want to mention this before we move on to the report. So in Alberta, we saw fed cattle prices up again this week, 5 to 10 higher dressed than last week. 510 to 520 delivered is the number you're looking at. And Ontario also jumped $8 dressed. They're at $5.35 delivered dress. So all those prices are new highs, like the U.S. So anyways, just finish up on that. But you're right. We did get a StatsCan released the July 1 Canadian cattle inventory report. You recall a month ago we talked about the U.S. report for July 1 in as far as their summer inventory report. And we did see some of those signs of that early heifer retention. This is July. The bulls are out with the heifers. We'll see what happens after preg check and decisions are made this fall. But certainly the indication that more heifers were out to be bred. Overall, the national cattle herd in Canada was up 1%, 11.9 million head. Beef cows nationally were no change from last year at all, 3.46 million head. The beef heifer replacement numbers, the one we're talking about, it was up 2% from last year. So again, minute, especially when you're talking Canadian numbers, that's not a big number jump, but it is indicating something. Across the country, it was interesting. Generally speaking, not a lot of change. Alberta beef cows were the same as last year, 1.52 million. In Saskatchewan, up 1%, 989,000 head. Manitoba was up 1%, 377,000 head of beef cows. and BC was up 3% at 198,000. Ontario also up 1% at 226,000 head of beef cows. So flat to slight increases. And again, with Alberta being the biggest province with beef cow numbers and not changing, obviously that kind of drove that national number.
Yeah, and what some people say, well, isn't there incentive right now for people to retain heifers? Yes, but there's also a huge incentive to not and to sell because the money is so good right now.
Yeah, money and weather, right? I mean, I think when we talked about this with the U.S. report, Shaun, is the western third of the U.S. still very dry, drought conditions. You can say the same thing in Canada in terms of pockets where stories are really good in terms of moisture and price, as you say. But other areas, if you're looking at a drought and you've been looking at a drought for several years, you're not going to be in that frame of mind to retain heifers. So it's really going to be mixed. And I think that's supporting probably a pretty slow rebuild in both countries would be where I put my money right now.
Well, I think it's a safe bet. But mind you, this cattle market continues to present us with things we didn't think was going to happen. So it's really, I'll tell you, it's the placement decision this fall for a lot of feed yards that is going to give a lot of feed yards real stomach aches, maybe a bit of relief on the feed cost side. I don't know about the Canadian dollar, though. It's, there's weakness in that U.S. dollar, so that's not good for the Canadian dollar. So there's some real stressful days of we got your calculator out and pounding it out and, oh, no, that can't be right. Got to do it again. You know what I mean? It's stressful days here from just trying to manage the risk at the feed yard level.
Yeah. And just the, placing at a loss, which is, that's going to be the storyline, betting on the come of the market. I mean, those are riskful times, especially at these dollars.
Yeah. And that's the point is right when is placing at a loss and how far we have come to the upside to require a further, higher highs. That's where it gets I think it's weighing on people trying to sort out what should I be doing. But I do have this whole pit of silage. I know I got to feed it out. Like it's the same old, when we were way lower in prices, we're making up the same arguments, right? I got a pit. I got a whole bunch of barley and corn bought. I got a pit full of silage. Got to convert it into cash. Let's go.
Yeah. And they need more money to do it. That's actually I think it's a big issue in the sector across Canada and the United States. Next week I'm going to be in Nebraska with the ag bankers at their annual meeting, and I'm sure there's a lot of feed yards coming to that group saying, "Hey, I need more money. These feeder cattle are very expensive." Yes, across the board. So good luck with that meeting, by the way.
Well, we're going to have fun. I'm looking forward to it. Definitely there's challenges on the cropping side, some of those loans for sure, but there's also opportunity we were just talking about on the cattle side. So it's kind of depending on what your book looks like, you're probably going to have a frown or a smile. Well, you'll be able to tell right away as you walk through the room, I bet.
Right. Demographics, where you are, the whole piece, whether you're a new producer coming into the bank or a season one. So there's going to be lots of variety, I suspect you're going to hear.
Hey, great stuff. Hey, Anne, thanks so much for joining us here today.
Okay, thanks. You too, Shaun.
We'll be back with the RealAg Issues Panel right after this.
Protect your anhydrous ammonia application earlier than normal this fall. Defend against potential losses and protect your bottom line with new Centuro A-Pro Nitrogen Stabilizer. Patented active ingredient pronitridine offers agronomically effective protection where it matters most, below ground. The new concentrated formulation lowers application rates. Start early with Centuro A-Pro as part of your nitrogen management plan. Contact your local retailer or visit centuro.ca for more information today.
The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com is a video series that showcases the latest in canola research and production agronomy. Learn from some of the best at your own pace through quick and timely producer-focused videos available on our YouTube channel. The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com is the quickest way to keep up to date on all the latest in canola production. Boost your canola IQ with the Canola School, brought to you by BASF, and visit canolaschool.com.
Built on over 100 years of seed innovation and unwavering commitment to farmers, Pioneer 100 Series canola hybrids deliver a step change in yield performance and agronomic traits. This isn't just better canola. It's different canola. Pioneer 100 Series. Contact your local Pioneer sales representative or visit pioneer.com/100 series to learn more today. Let's get going on this Friday with RealAg Issues Panel as we're last Friday of August. It is here, and also here is our panel. Bringing first Lyndsey Smith coming out of Ottawa, Ontario. Lyndsey, how are we doing?
Well, I just wrote down the date as April, not August. So
wishful thinking.
That's all you need to know.
Summer is behind us, not in front of us.
Or maybe I want to go back in time and make some different decisions about this growing season. I don't know. Anyway,
what would be your biggest different decision?
Oh, great question. Oh, wow. I think that I probably would have spent some money on one of these really cool spraying machines that like your animal walks through and it sprays them for a treatment, because we have dealt with horrible fly strike, as I've mentioned a few times. And had I known it was going to be this bad, that unit, I think it's about $5,000 US out of Turkey, if you can believe it, priced it out, and it would have paid for itself this year, for sure. So
fly strike is
gross. That's what I would have done differently. It's disgusting. Yeah, thank you, everybody. And we have battled it. It's a lot of labor, a lot of time, and a lot of death loss, and that's the money I would have spent back in April.
I hear you. Well, he's been on the combine all week. He's dusty. He's grumpy. He's got some thoughts. It is Kelvin Heppner coming out of Altona, Manitoba. How are you doing today, Kelvin?
I like the expectations you're setting there. I'm doing well here, Shaun. We've had a good run in spring wheat this week. Yeah, a lot of sunshine and hot temperatures here. So, knock on wood that we could potentially finish the wheat later today. So, yeah, it's been good, and a lot of woulda, coulda, shouldas at this time of year too, when you're combining and thinking, man, I should have tried this, should have done this, should have paid better attention when we were seeding this to what was working and what wasn't. There's another plug row there, that kind of thing. Should have maybe pushed fertility higher, seeing what some of the yield potential is right now, but that's always in hindsight, of course, when I'm not having to pay the bill right now.
So are you writing those things down so that they're part of your plan for 2026, or are you just leaving them in the wind?
Oh, probably mainly in the wind. I should write them down. I know that,
way to be honest. Yeah. That's good. I appreciate the
At
honesty.
least he's honest, you guys. Yeah. Except for the plugged row. Please, can you fix that? Please?
Yeah, that I've had to look at all growing seasons, so that's going to be dealt with next spring. Sure.
Okay. Okay, well, that's good. Also joining us is the managing director at CAPI. It is Tyler McCann. Hey, how are we doing, Tyler?
I'm doing well, Shaun. The good news about the end of August is that it's Shovel Fair weekend. That's our fall fair at home, and kicked off last night. We're pretty excited about it, and I'm going to do a run of fall fairs in the Ottawa Valley, and it is my most favorite time of the year.
Yeah, you seem like a real fair guy. Like you're all in on the fair.
I am. I'm actually not on the fair board this year for the first time in 18 years, and it meant I got to go on some rides last night with my kids. My 5-year-old was driving the bumper car around, and she was having a great time crashing into people. So get to do that. And then Saturday we've got beef show that we're going to MC the dairy show this morning. We're all in on the fair.
Nice. Do they have some funky food at the fair?
They do. So, but more importantly, our local 4-H club's got a 4-H booth. So we kind of shun the funky food in support of local beef burgers all weekend long. But we may find something different a meal or two.
Lyndsey, I know you're a big fan of like the crazier the food item, the better.
So I like fair. I can't do rides anymore, everybody. And Tyler, hats off to you. I mean, bumper cars I could maybe handle, but in my advanced age, I can't do the spinny upside downy any of that stuff anymore.
We did the orbiter after with.
Yeah, there you go. I'm into the livestock shows and the food. And so that is that's what it's all about. You walk around, you find the best deep fried whatever, and experience fair culture. And I am a big fan. I highly recommend.
So
Go
good.
check it out.
So good. Mm-hmm. Okay, we've got some economic numbers that came out this morning. I was listening to it live actually on Bloomberg Radio when it came out, and they were like, whoa, Canada. Whoa, look at those Canadian numbers. Not great. Canada's gross domestic product shrank 1.6 annualized % in the second quarter. Statistics Canada reported on Friday today. That's the biggest decline since the COVID-19 pandemic and the first contraction in nearly 2 years. What do we make of it, Kelvin?
I don't think it's a huge surprise that it's negative. Bank of Canada has been forecasting numbers in this range, but I think there was a survey of economists prior to the report that was expecting a smaller decline, something less than 1%, and here we got a 1.6% number. And as expected, again, not a huge surprise, driven by decreased exports. Exports fell 27% on an annualized basis as U.S. tariffs are taking their toll, even though we have the CUSMA USMCA exemption in place that Prime Minister Carney highlighted again last week. Exports are running into issues, and certainly there's pressure on companies to produce in the U.S. and so we're seeing that export number really contributing to the lower GDP today.
I think imports out of the U.S. were down as well.
Yeah, imports declined 5.1%. There were some positive numbers, it sounds like, in terms of domestic demand, some growth there in terms of spending, household consumption accelerating despite some of these things happening. But I'm not sure. Again, some of this is an issue of timing, and if we start seeing layoffs climb and unemployment climb, that certainly won't help with household consumption in driving domestic demand either.
Lyndsey, you're sitting next to Prime Minister Carney this morning. What advice are you giving him?
Yes, he comes for coffee every Friday. It's just what we do here in Ottawa. So it is interesting to see how this last week has gone as far as where the Prime Minister has been, where our cabinet ministers have been. I mean, they've been spending a ton of time in Europe doing all sorts of tours there. So I think what many people want to see is action, and they want to see deals. They want to see announcements. So we did see, discussion on working with Germany with critical minerals and potentially buying stuff from Germany. So increasing trade ties there. I think what these numbers also suggest, or maybe drive home for a lot of Canadians if they're paying attention, is just how much of an exporting country Canada is. And I think within agriculture, sometimes we get frustrated that everybody thinks about, autos, or they think about, local this, local that, or, all these sorts of things. And sometimes it can be easy to forget that like a huge part of our Canadian economy is largely dependent on making sales to other countries. Yes, the US being one of them. And so I do think, or I hope anyway, that these numbers really drive home that message of just how key these markets are and the work that has to happen to make sure that we're still exporting or finding new trade deals or exporting more to other places, and that trade diversification piece that we talk about so much.
Yeah. Tyler, what's your reaction? What do you think? Does it put more pressure on Carney to make some change?
So I think that what it does is hopefully motivates the Prime Minister. I think that they have been trying to communicate message that they're on this path, that we're going to try and drive some change in the Canadian economy and what underpins it. So worth noting that I think that there's been this debate politically around kind of the Conservatives' affordability message versus Carney's trade message, and I think that people see those as a bit of a contrast. But got to assume that these concerns around affordability will morph more into what about my job and what about the economic position that I'm in as some of these things come to the fore. I saw some math this morning that says that if you look at real per capita GDP in Canada, it was higher in the second quarter of 2019 than it is in the second quarter of 2025. And I think that speaks to some real challenging positions that Canada is going into. And I think it really speaks to the need to really drive for this kind of, what does a growth agenda look like when you don't have the United States to rely on to drive that growth? And I don't think that we've fully figured that out yet, but I think we need to get into this mindset. And I think it's a challenge for agriculture, where what we need to do is think about how do we add value more to the raw commodities that we produce. So how do we take the canola, beef, pork, milk that we're producing, find more ways to add more value to it and make it more of an economic driver for the country, recognizing again that all of that is harder to do when we don't have reliable market access to the United States anymore.
I think, Kelvin,
go ahead. I was going to say, Tyler mentioned per capita GDP there, and that's another contributing factor here that's maybe not getting attention. Canada for many years has had issues with growing our GDP, and we've masked some of those issues by bringing more people to our country and benefiting from their labor and immigration. There's a lot of pressure on reducing, and that's caused a lot of stress in areas of social institutions when it comes to healthcare and education and those types of housing. Of course, a big thing there too. We not only are looking at not having growth into the U.S. market, restrictions on China, of course, don't need to mention those. But if we also don't have increasing labor supply growing in our country from immigration, that's another thing that puts pressure on this as well. And all of these things are coming to a head right now.
So I'm going to ask an economics question here. So if we increase the amount of processing, and so we're taking those raw goods and we're applying some sort of finish to them. Maybe they're not a finished good, but they're a little bit further down the chain. Okay, that makes sense to me. So, but aren't we just pushing we still have to export. And so although the raw commodity itself may not be as impacted directly to the farm gate, the processor still faces challenges on trying to ship that good out of the country based on the significance of some of the thickening of the trade lanes, so to speak. Kelvin, isn't the problem doesn't go away?
Not necessarily, unless, you can, and in some ways it actually, that's part of the reason why we have struggled probably to have some value add happen in Canada because of uncertainty. Rather locate that processing facility closer to the end use market where you can source the raw commodity from different countries, different markets, and take out some of that uncertainty. This is a situation that our Western Canadian crush plants that were built for exporting canola oil to China are facing right now with tariffs and restrictions on that canola oil. Now those companies are thinking, well, maybe was that investment worth it? Was it justified if we don't have access to China? So, it is still a risk factor there. The thing is that you can retain more value, you can employ more people domestically, and in theory, there is some risk mitigation, taking some risk off the table than when you do have more value-added processing at home. But sure, it's something that we've talked about for decades, and doesn't just happen like that.
Well, and now, although I will mention everybody's favorite port, Churchill, got more love this week as well, that it was actually named by Carney as part of like a bigger plan to move things. So
a new port.
But again,
basically he said that a new port is coming to Churchill.
Yeah, which again, we talked about it last week, and throughout my career, I think we've talked about Churchill far more than product gets moved through it. But I do think, Shaun, to your point, is that what it does drive home is, can we please have this conversation and with the appropriate action items that come after of, if we want to focus on that domestic processing, further processing, even if it's just one more step, two more steps, whatever, it has to get to port and it has to get to markets. So the market has to be open or at least dependable, etc. But we have to be able to move it from wherever it is out. And this week, for the first time in a long time, I think, hearing a prime minister, maybe we've talked about it, but to hear a prime minister talk about ports in Atlantic Canada, about LNG and moving out of Atlantic Canada, hearing about Churchill, hearing about, to me, we need to have this focus on the value chain and all components of it, not just, hey, we need to process more, or hey, we need to, again, all of these pieces of the puzzle need attention, and some of them maybe need attention first so we can actually move backwards down the chain or forwards. So that to me at least is, I feel like we're at least, it looks like anyway, we're maybe having some of these more fulsome conversations of the entire value chain.
Okay, coming up next on Real Ag Radio, what we're going to do is we're going to dig in on India. If India's relationship with the U.S. is worsening, could that be good for Canada? It's a little bit of a flip from the China situation. We'll discuss when we come back. You're listening to Real Ag Radio, Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM.
The new Brand XT grain cart delivers unmatched forward auger reach, side auger reach, and discharge spout clearance for easy positioning, with sight lines that allow you to actually see what you're doing while you're doing it, saving you time with each load and getting you back to the combine sooner. They say hindsight is 20/20. We say seeing what's in front of you is better. Lead the field with the new XT grain cart from Brand.
The Pulse School on RealAgriculture.com has everything you need to get your crop off to a great start and a strong finish. Whether you're growing chickpeas, faba beans, lentils, or peas, you'll get all the latest and best agronomic information at PulseSchool.com. A library of top-notch agronomy videos from industry experts available on demand at your fingertips. Visit the Pulse School, brought to you by BASF on RealAgriculture.com.
Oh, welcome back to RealAg Radio. Shaun Haney, your host from RealAgriculture.com. Also, of course, joined by Lyndsey Smith and Kelvin Heppner of Real Agriculture and Tyler McCann he's now out of CAPI. He's the managing director at CAPI. I sound like he was coming out of CAPI is like a cannon that he was coming out of. And anyway. Okay.
Chauvel Fair Cannon.
Yeah,
Chauvel Fair Cannon.
Chauvel Fair Cannon. Yeah.
Let's he was the former fair chairperson. So I can't believe there's not like a dunk tank. Like dunk the former chair.
Yeah, no, I don't know.
If anybody from the
missed that
Chauvel
one.
Fair Society is listening to this show, which I'm sure there are.
Well, there are, yeah, may come up, but you know, I don't
like the idea.
think that they've got stuff already busy weekend already. Hard to slide a dump tank in.
That sounds like
I think they can do
the
it.
icebreaker at Grow Canada. This is exactly what we need. A Tyler McCann dunk tank.
No, I thought the Pierre Patel dunk tank. I would get solidly behind
not.
Pierre Patel in a dunk tank.
No.
Pierre,
He's
they've got
got a good
some.
arm.
Dave Hansen's a past board chair at CropLife. You could put him in the.
There you go.
In the Grow Canada.
We are
dunk
so
tank.
full of.
We
good
should start a
ideas.
list.
Yeah.
Yeah, everybody send us who you want to see in a dunk tank. There you go.
Okay, earlier in the
Think of the
Make it
money we
happen.
could raise. Think of the money we could raise for something.
Just think of it all.
Exactly.
Think of it all. Okay, so earlier this spring, it was interesting. You know, we had Prime Minister Modi of India at the White House, and it was a warm sort of back and forth, the opposite of what we saw out of when Zelensky went there the first time. And it was kind of like U.S. and India are going to be new trade partners. A trade deal is right around the corner. Well, that has not happened. Things have got incredibly frosty. And very similar in some ways, even frostier than the situation between the U.S. and China. This week, we heard a former Trump cabinet member, Peter Navarro, even mention that the Russia-Ukraine war was Modi's war, which was some pretty strong language that got a lot of attention in India. Meanwhile, Canada's relationship with India seems to be getting a little bit better, Tyler. This is pretty significant news.
Yeah, it was announced this week, building on the Prime Minister's hosting of Prime Minister Modi at the G7 meeting, where they started to rekindle that Canada-India romance that they have actually, the two countries have named who the high commissioners are going to be. So we are restoring full diplomatic relations. And again, it is quite stark to see how Canada and India are making progress at a time when India and the United States seem to be going in the opposite direction. And I think it's also something that, I think in agriculture, we often, we cheer these things on. We see these as really good news, common sense for Canadian farmers and ag businesses that we would have good, strong relationships with India. But I think we should have an appreciation for how much of a political challenge this is for the Prime Minister and the Liberal caucus. He was criticized by his own caucus members when he invited Modi to the G7 meeting. I think that's not something that we've seen a lot, or we see a lot, where MPs of one party criticize the leader of that party, and that happened over this issue. I can't imagine those tensions inside the Liberal caucus have gone away, but the Prime Minister is pushing ahead with this. And again, I think it speaks to the sense that we need to find these allies. We need to do what's right. And I think it does potentially set the stage for some change of the dynamic with China. But as we've seen over the last couple of weeks, that's difficult.
Yeah, Lyndsey, I wonder if it's a little bit different. With the China situation, when the U.S. and China battle it out, Canada seems to get the brunt of some impact from China. And some of it's self-inflicted, okay? But at least that's the outcome that we feel. In this situation, the relationship between the U.S. and India have gotten worse, and maybe India is going to approach this a little bit differently. We could see a little bit more of a positive relationship with India because of that. I guess that is at least a movement in the right direction.
Well, it is, but it also, I think, sort of shows just how there are similarities between China and India. And we talk about that a lot, right? These are giant, populous countries that can when they're in the market for Canadian goods, be an incredible importer of Canadian goods. And for India, it's pulses that we think of. And it can be an incredibly valuable market for Canadian product. Absolutely. But it's also, and when we think about, difficult trading relationships, we maybe don't think about until recently the US, we think about China, but India is one of those that it is just as complex, but just for different reasons. And I think that's maybe, there might be some similarities, but India is a very interesting market because it can be incredibly protectionist. Tariffs go on, tariffs go off. The government in India just manages its population differently as far as, food aid and keeping prices down and there's, I guess, now I'm not an expert, but from the coverage that we do and from the conversations we have, like in some ways, India, there's more transparency into what's happening with their weather, what's happening with their food supplies, with all that sort of stuff. So it is different in how we deal with India, but it's more complicated because, of course, we do have serious diplomatic issues where, the Canadian government has accused India of murdering Canadians on Canadian soil and being involved in it. Like that's a pretty huge diplomatic relationship to try and navigate. So it is just as complicated. It's just complicated in different ways. And it's also a valuable market, but it's one that I think we're just more used to being in and out of, more so than like as structural as something like obviously the US, but even China, really.
Yeah. Kelvin?
Yeah, I think I echo what Lyndsey and Tyler both said here. It has lots of potential. India is, in terms of, if you compare it to China, it's much closer to a democracy and democratic principles that it's built on. Not saying it's still far from perfect, and certainly there are the issues, including what Lyndsey mentioned with the murder in Canada a couple of years ago. But I think if Canada wants to make friends, we can't have everybody be our enemies at the same time. I think there needs to be kind of some effort, and putting diplomats back in the country doesn't mean that everything's good. It just means that things are thawing and that we are back to trying to have a functional relationship.
It could very easily be put back in the freezer next week. That's the hard part about this, Tyler.
Yeah, it really is. And the other really big caveat that we always have to not lose sight of is that India is not the United States. India is not China when it comes to that commercial relationship with Canada, and I increasingly struggle with this talk around trade diversification and developing new markets, and that we really need to understand the limitations of what that means in the Canadian context. And India is certainly different. India is a very large country. India has been a very reliable market, or has the potential to be a reliable market for Canadian ag exports. We do other business across the economy with them. Europe is different because it is has the potential to be a large, reliable market. Japan, China, everything else gets to be difficult. And so all of this extra work and effort that's going to go into maintaining relationships with these countries to try and diversify, it's going to be a lot of effort for potentially little reward. But you've got this really kind of very short list of top markets like India, China, Europe, where we can have an impact. And it has been good to see, again, not only this restoration of relationships with India, but also more Canadian presence in Europe. I think that is the sign that the government is finally taking, renewing its relationships with the world very seriously.
Wasn't there a commitment this week to reignite talks on Mercosur as well?
Yes,
the trade minister went down in South America.
Yeah. I just sometimes think that trade, we talk about it like it's a Netflix subscription, like it's like recurring revenue, that we're just setting up these sort of like agreements with China and India where, they're going to, on an every month basis, just, keep chugging along and keep on buying Canadian. I think we should expect more ebb and flow with those two countries. Japan probably is more like that Netflix subscription, whereas China and India, they are large buyers, they're opportunistic buyer. There's some also domestic politics that do drive what the demand they have for things like Canadian or U.S. goods. I just compared India to a Netflix subscription, so that's a pretty good metaphor, Kelvin.
That is good, and I think a lot of this, we also compare U.S. The power of the farm lobby in the U.S. versus Canada a lot. India might be the one country in the world where the farm lobby is even more powerful than the U.S. farm lobby, and that's something that certainly needs to be kept in mind and understood in entering all of these trade negotiations and relationships with India.
Lyndsey, something that's on my radar here for the next 3 years is I think we are going to see a flood of merger and acquisition activity in the corporate world, and the agriculture is going to be a part of that. Now, some of that is driven by the fact that things are tight in some areas of the sector. So, machinery, for example, there could be some consolidation there. You think there's going to, potentially something like biologicals in that space. There's going to be some consolidation there. The other thing that's driving it, though, is the fact that people see an opening with the current administration in the White House to be very pro merger and acquisition in comparison to where they were not too long ago, pre-November with the Biden administration, even the first Trump administration. If 90% of farmers told us, Lyndsey, they are concerned about consolidation, they're going to be prepared to be more concerned about it because it's coming.
And I mean, consolidation, and we've talked about this before, it at times comes sort of in waves, right? And whether that wave is within a sector or several sectors, and it's a convergence of different factors. And you're right, if you've got, the appetite potentially at a government level, for some of these things to happen, it may mean that what would be maybe a more questionable merger might ends up getting green lighted. I think, from a farmer's perspective, what we often hear, and sometimes it's fear of change, but often we already, hear that there isn't necessarily a lot of competition. There isn't necessarily a lot of transparency. If as a value chain narrows at different points, you end up with potentially concentrating more power in different places. And ultimately, farmers then have to manage for less choice, potentially more risk. And frankly, I mean, I think about it from the grain company perspective, you end up potentially with having to haul further, not being able to compare prices necessarily or be able to, negotiate between two because you end up with one place to deliver potentially. So we've also seen, some of the negatives on the machinery side as far as consolidation of even dealerships, of the service side, the more concentrated that we get at different points in the supply chain, the more difficult it can be from the farmer's perspective to potentially run their business. But the flip side to that is that we are also seeing continued consolidation on the farm side as well. And that, I think, is a key part of what this looks like going forward, is that is going to change too. There's no two ways about it. And so what does that change from the farm level, as far as, the flip side of that, of becoming, a larger, more consolidated farm? Does that buy you purchasing power? Does that buy you leverage potentially?
Yeah. Well, and one of the, now we're through the Bunge acquisition of Viterra. I think a lot of people in the agriculture industry, specifically in the U.S., more focused on this Union Pacific, Norfolk Southern deal that is potentially out there. And this week, President Trump, I took this on the news earlier this week, President Trump fired Robert Primus, who was a member of the Surface Transportation Board. And he was actually one of the board members that stood up against the CPKC merger when it was in front of the STB. So clearing the way potentially for a greater chance of approval of that Union Pacific, Norfolk Southern deal. Okay, let's take a break. We've got more coming up here on RealAg Radio right after.
Although the cost per ton is higher, RiseAbsorb is cheaper per acre than MAP. RiseAbsorb is more efficient, therefore we use less fertilizers to deliver the same amount of phosphorus to the crop. On average, growers save $5 to $7 per acre, and RiseAbsorb has a demonstrated yield increase of 3 to 5 bushels, generating a $20 ROI compared to MAP. You can go to phosolutions.com and check out our grower savings calculator and see how much you can save on your farm.
It's summertime, and you've got a lot of important decisions to make when it comes to your corn crop. Let the Corn School on RealAgriculture.com help guide you through those big decisions with input from leading experts in the field. If it's spray timing, disease identification, or any other field issue, the Corn School's got you covered. The Corn School on RealAgriculture.com. Brought to you by BASF and Pride Seeds.
Would it be Canada if we didn't have labor issues? Kelvin, that seems like a really reasonable question.
Yeah, and we saw the government try to end the strike at Air Canada last week, and the union ignored it. And Tyler can talk to this as well, but it sure is setting up some scenarios I think that we should be concerned about in agriculture when it comes to our next labor issue, whenever it is with the railways or at the port or wherever it is in our export infrastructure.
Yeah. So the next time, railways or Vancouver terminals on strike, the government says you got to get back to work. Yeah. You know what? I don't think so. Cause for those Air Canada people, it worked out pretty well, I have to say. Tyler,
both the ignoring.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, there's two issues to me before Tyler comments. There's the precedent that was set with the union ignoring the Section 107 back to work command from government. Which is a new development. The government's been invoking Section 107 a lot over the last couple of years, and this is the first time that a union has floated that back to work command. But also just in terms of public perception and the political clout that the Carney government used up in getting the Air Canada strike ended, I'm curious what Canadians as a whole, how they feel about it. And we certainly see a Conservative Party right now in opposition that is giving a lot of airtime to workers' rights and to trying to get that blue collar unionized vote. So is Carney going to be more reluctant the next time there is a strike to intervene? I think that's also a factor. So there's both the actual legislative regulatory aspect of it, but also a public perception issue. And Tyler can have more detail to that.
I just want to hammer on that 1 second with Lyndsey, because Lyndsey, I've been asking producers, do you see a difference in the Carney government from Trudeau? And a lot of farmers say, no, not really. But I think this is a classic example of yes. It was surprising. And it kind of caught everybody, I think, off guard. Like, wow, we're only like 24 hours into this or 48 hours into this. And wow, like we used to beg for weeks for this. And this is very quick action. That is different than the prior government.
But airlines are different than railways in terms of immediate impact on Canadians and people talking about it on social media. Sorry,
Lyndsey, your voice got a lot deeper.
Yes, I know. And also I grew a beard. It's amazing. No, Kelvin's exactly right. And it is an important distinction is that, and we ended the last segment talking about consolidation. I mean, what do we have in Canada? Two main airlines. That's it. And so when an airline goes on strike in the middle of summer and, vacay time, it impacts so many people immediately. And this is a key difference between a railway strike. You could argue that a railway strike or a port strike or whatever, it may have disastrous economic consequences overall. Yes. However, the individual impact to the average Canadian, very low. And so realistically, I think that it's not apples to apples per se, but the speed at which the government invoked the Section 107 is remarkable. Like it really does. And I think to that point, Kelvin, like it is a difference that like really, I think surprised a lot of people. And it does. And one of these days we're going to let Tyler talk about this. It does, I think, sort of cue us up for when Parliament resumes sitting, which will be soon. Are we going to see a potential of policy shifts? Because as Kelvin pointed out, we had the workers basically ignore the government order, but we also had a government that used it almost immediately to be like, no, you're going back. So we do have a labor problem in Canada. This is not news. But I think that the tools that we have right in front of us, at least right now, just don't seem to be working or are very easily broken.
Well, Lyndsey clearly doesn't support Canadians' right to unionize. That's she referred to that as
that's not anything that I said.
Tyler, what are your thoughts?
So just Shaun, on the comment about farmers not noticing a difference, I heard someone say this week that a Mark Carney government's a lot more like a fourth-term Stephen Harper government than it is a fourth-term Justin Trudeau government, and those that don't see a difference aren't looking close enough, because I think on almost all accounts, this is a radically different government than what it was before. But on the issue of labor relations, I think that there's always this temptation in ag circles to say the issue is the unions and we just need to take away their right to strike, or we need to make it an essential service and we just need to do away with this. But what we've seen this week is a good reminder of how complicated and messy labor relations are these days. The reality is the government of Canada, the Canadian Charter is effectively protects the right to strike. The Supreme Court has not looked kindly at deeming things essential services. That is effectively not at this point in time, unless the government's going to invoke a notwithstanding clause. I'm not sure if they can do that. It's just not an option, but we need our other solutions. And hopefully kind of this blowing up in the government's face really puts more kind of fire under them to try and say, okay, what other tools can we do? How can we change the legislation so that governments do have more options when something goes sideways here? And the other thing that hopefully it does is it sends a message to management that management needs to act differently. I don't think that there's been enough attention to the fact that, by all accounts, the Air Canada management botched this royally, and it did put the government in a very difficult place and position. The issue is not the governments. I think the issue is the management at Air Canada really screwed this one up. But at the end of the day, governments need more tools. They need different approaches. An essential service designation for anyone, I don't think is a legitimate option. So what else is there? And that gets into potentially some really creative solutions around, again, workers on boards of directors, changing the governance of these organizations. How do you look at potentially a grand bargain where workers do potentially trade off some of their right to strike in order for more of a stake in the management decision-making of these organizations? And I think if we really want to get long-term peace in this space, we need to think a lot more creatively about how we're going to try and solve for labor relations and create more peace and predictability when we really need it, right? If we're going to invest billions of dollars in a new port infrastructure, that only works if we've got reliable transportation infrastructure, reliable systems to get it there.
That's a tough sell for some people that's going to be interesting because we see more of that in Europe where there's a couple board seats that are given to the union or something like that. Yeah. Does that actually lessen the likelihood of a strike, or like those two poor people from the union that got it oh god, that would be terrible.
But you got to have incentives aligned between management and employees, and if employees don't have incentive for if there's no consequence for going on strike to employees, if all they get is benefit, then I think you got to make a way that both sides have skin in the game and don't want labor disruptions that hurt the company and hurt society as a whole have some consequences for either management or staff. And to Tyler's point about Air Canada management botching this, I'm not sure. The last few years, they've seen the government intervene as soon as there's been a labor stoppage with Section 107. So why not have Plan B, let the government intervene? And sure, you can say they shouldn't have. And I agree, the government hasn't didn't help itself by continually invoking Section 107 over the last number of years. But in some ways, that's been management's plan because the government has shown a willingness to intervene. That's not going to be sustainable.
And I think, Shaun, I think just important to underline the political realignment that's happened on this issue, right? Because, again, it is right-wing populist parties that have become the champions of workers' rights. And so we've seen Poilievre, the Conservatives in Canada, take this on. Oren Cass in the United States, again, often seen as one of kind of the leading intellectuals in this new right movement, champion putting workers on boards of directors. So I think that this idea that this is something that the socialists or the communists would advocate for is that's not how these political dynamics are playing out anymore. It's a very different dynamic, and I think that we want to find solutions. We need to think differently about this.
So, and if I can, I just wanted, I think to bring this in, think about, so we still have ongoing labor issues with Canada Post. Canada Post is, I think all of us can agree, an organization that absolutely needs an overhaul. That's right. And ultimately, when we have, or our traditional, labor versus management, it is very divisive. And I think by nature, yes, that's how it is or sort of has to be. But I don't know. And to the point of having staff with skin in the game, having them have a say at the management level on the board table, et cetera, we do have to approach this differently because ultimately, you end up with something like, and Canada Post is a great example of it, of like an organization that really is being rotted out from the inside because of this division between the two, and it needs to change. Like the world has changed.
That's a natural friction, though. Like just
just get comfy with natural friction. But I guess my point is that like in my mind, like unions have their place absolutely, and I understand where unionizing stems from, even in the modern age, etc. But ultimately, like if you've got your workforce that are just so opposed to any change out of fear for their jobs, how do you take an organization and keep moving it forward? You can't. So there has to be a mechanism by which an organization can change that actually means it exists in the long term, and that means that the jobs exist in the long term. So yeah, we've got Canada Post, we've got our airlines, we've got our railways, we've got our ports, we've got like there's all these places that in my mind, like, yes, I know there is a natural friction between the two, but ultimately, like, we can gain more by actually figuring out how to get a voice on both sides so that we're not completely dependent on our government to be the principal that walks in and smacks everybody on the hand, which is apparently taboo now. But, you know, and says, okay, everybody get along. Like, we can't, that's not the role of our prime minister. It's not the role of our government to go in and do this. The government should be setting up a framework where businesses can be successful and we can get product to port and we can actually create economic wealth in this country. It's not up to the government to be sending people back to work over and over.
Yeah, I just think it's, I don't know what the description is, but I was going to say naive, but it's because there's, you know, from a corporate perspective, hey, we've got 2 union reps on our board of directors now, you know, they're going to understand our issues as a business.
Shaun, there's much more creative options than that. There's employee-owned trusts where they can take an ownership stake in the company. I think there's a lot more creative options than just plugging in some grumpy union people on a board.
Yeah.
Who said the union people be grumpy? I just want it for the record.
Aren't all people on boards grumpy?
I don't know.
Boards.
My sense is that Shaun's worried about Lyndsey's going to run the union leadership campaign at RealAg, and she's going to be the grumpy union rep on the RealAg.
Could you imagine
a great idea
with that, Tyler?
I would be such a great grumpy union rep.
May I? Grumpy union rep?
Okay, but do you know what my biggest thing would be? It would be like to advocate for better coffee for all. That would really just be it. And
well, since everybody's remote, that's kind of like a personal choice that you're making.
but I think
I love my coffee. Anyway, carry on.
But I think it speaks to kind of this world that we're in is changing, right? Where it's about how do we get workers and management working better together on these infrastructure projects, right? How do we get First Nations communities and businesses working better together? It is like we can only fix these things if we find ways to make it work better together. And it doesn't make it easy, but it means that we've got to like think differently about it because we just don't have the right or the luxury to try and plow ahead and face disruption or expect someone else to come in and rescue it.
Yeah, I just don't know if the disruption. We'll see. I'm being cynical here. I'm being cynical. What we also don't need is the government taking 10% ownership stake in companies. There, I said that as well. Hey, when we look at the satisfaction with the Carney government, Canadian farmers in our last Canadian Farmer Sentiment Index said that overall, how satisfied are you with the first 3 months of the Carney government? 11% very satisfied, 24% somewhat satisfied, and 29% very dissatisfied in terms of the first 100 days of Carney. That's all the time we have here for the RealAg Issues Panel. Of course, we got some time for a bonus round. So for those of you listening to the RealAg Radio Podcast, you can stay on. If you're on Rural Radio, just go download the podcast wherever you get your podcast. Tyler, have yourself a great weekend.
Great. Thanks, Shaun.
You too, Kelvin.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.
Lyndsey, all the best to you.
Oh, thanks. Grumpy and all.
If you have any feedback, send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. Thanks so much, everybody, for getting real and getting connected with RealAg Radio. Cheers, everybody. And here we are in the bonus. No sports references in the entire panel, which we need to fix here in the bonus round. I feel like we've let everybody down. What's
We'll
that?
add it to our list of union demands, Sean.
Yeah, exactly. But can I start? Like, I have the best one.
What?
That is totally sports related. Travis
Gonna
Kelce
be-
and Taylor Swift got engaged. And they announced it this week, but maybe it was a little while ago. But he's like sports adjacent, right? So that's cool. Anyway,
He is?
carrying on.
Well,
Doesn't he play in the
Travis
NFL?
Kelce?
He plays
Yeah.
in the
Sure,
NFL.
he is sport. That is sport.
You mean a
So
jinx.
I'm just
Their
saying.
personal life is sports adjacent.
They were, of course, at the Cincinnati Bearcat versus Nebraska Cornhusker game last night in Kansas City. Of course, Travis Kelce went to Cincinnati, so him and Taylor were at the game, and they showed them. It looks like they left at halftime because all of a sudden the second half it was all video footage of Patrick Mahomes, who was also at the game. So,
That other guy. Anyway,
Yeah.
so that's my sportsing for this week.
I don't do well with sportsing on a good day. I like it even less when it's like Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce. So this is like scraping the
could you?
barrel of sportsing.
No, they are wonderful humans. And as
I'm
my 8-year-old points out, as I said, I'm so excited for these people that I don't know. And she's like, no, Mom, you know them. They don't know you.
yeah.
Thank you for bringing
Exactly.
me down.
Don't you think that? Yeah, I've been telling my wife this all week. Like, why do we care about this?
Yeah.
But hey, she
Because
tells me we should care.
Yeah, Trish is right.
I describe it this way: it probably be kind of like being like you're proposing to prison, and I'm sure Taylor is a great person, but like being married to that level of celebrity, like that, it would. I think that's like being in like it's like being in a prison. You can't do anything. Like where
You know
can
what?
you
He's going to
go?
be very comfortable in said prison. I
Well-
think they're going to be fine.
We can just ask
Honestly.
Chris and find out what it's like.
This is true. Yeah, like when they go to the carp fair, Tyler.
Yeah.
There's actually people that have to
Mobbed.
walk around the two of them.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, we're kind of a big deal. Let's be honest.
Sort of like when Floyd Mayweather's going around Vegas. Like you got to have a whole deed.
It's exactly the same, actually.
Tyler,
Carrying on.
Tyler, you're a little surprised that 29% of Canadian farmers are dissatisfied with Mark Carney. What would what would be?
Yeah. So
Very
I'm
dissatisfied.
I'm curious as to what's motivated. So I think that we have to deal with. We talked about kind of the changing political dynamics around the labor issue, and I wonder at one point in time we start to see some changing political dynamics on agriculture issues. Because you do have to keep in mind, right? Like we have seen a government, the prime minister got rid of the carbon tax very early on. We've seen this. We talked about the realignment with India. Kind of trade has become a priority again. We've got the new energy minister talking about how, oh, by the way, we need to export some natural gas to Europe, which is something the last government had forgot about for 10 years. And on the other side, we've seen, the Conservative Party forget about agriculture issues on the platform during their election campaign. We've seen Poilievre at a time when we should be trying to protect domestic markets for biodiesel, calling for an end to the clean fuel regulations. Like there are, I don't want to say that Conservative Party is like anti-agriculture, but I think that agriculture political landscape is a lot messier than it used to be. And I think that farmers could gain some political advantage if they play this a little bit smarter, set aside kind of the partisan differences and looked and said, actually, substantively, what are these two parties offering us today? And maybe realize that there's some more that they could gain with a government that is already working in their favor. And so I just think that this landscape, the political landscape on ag issues, is a lot messier than it used to be. And this idea that we've got a third of farmers that are very dissatisfied with what the government's doing, I just don't think reflects the reality of what we've seen.
Do you think the 11% should be very satisfied?
No, I wouldn't go that far. And again, I think that there's clearly issues, right? And the Mark Carney government, the length of time that it took the prime minister to respond to the China tariff issues, I think is a good example of how ag issues are certainly not top of mind for the government and are not a priority. But I think that what we lived through for a decade, where I think that there was hostility to agriculture issues, has changed. And I think that kind of the fundamentals of what's driving the government is much more closer, maybe not fully aligned with ag issues, but closer than what they used to be. And again, I think that agriculture does a disservice by just continuing to be so openly hostile to a liberal government. They need to kind of look past the red versus the blue and say, okay, what's the government actually doing at the end of the day?
Kelvin, remember at the Republican National Convention before the election, Hulk Hogan was on, God rest, may he rest in peace. But Hulk Hogan was on the stage giving his speech, and he like tore off his shirt, and he had like Trump 24 shirt on.
Tyler's got his Carney.
Yeah, if we rip Tyler's shirt off, he's got a Carney.
I was wondering where you were going with this.
I
thought we were going to talk about Hulk Hogan, but no.
I'm very, very officially nonpartisan, but I think
officially.
Very officially nonpartisan
because he just said it now on a podcast. So
and that's makes it the case. But I think that again, I think that the farmers miss out on the political game whenever they don't realize that actually there are like some good things that are happening. And on the other side, again, I go back to the lack of an ag platform. Some of these things that Polyev is doing that would be openly hostile to ag interests.
To me, in defense of that 29%, though, there's a lot of this is talk so far and messaging, not actual practical, pragmatic changes that have been implemented so far. Expectations have been set of change in terms of messaging.
Carbon tax is gone, Kelvin. India relationship is a good example where that's a change right away. We've seen some agri-stability changes that are there. Like some these things do take time, but it hasn't just been talk. There have been actions, and again, I think we're gearing up for potentially a very disruptive fall with a budget that has some budget cuts. We'll see what that means for agriculture at the end of the day. Push on regulatory reform, which could be really good for the government. We'll see where that goes. Let's talk again at Christmas and see how the fall's been, because that's when the action's going to happen.
Okay. Tyler doesn't want to come on until Christmas.
Yeah, apparently. I have to revise the schedule. I'm just kind of, because of the culture, I'm taking the under. I'm taking the under on the actual what it looks like versus what we're talking about. Look at elbows up. We were going to the penalty box for more than a 4-minute double minor. We were looking at a match penalty the way we were talking, and we might get a light holding call at this point.
Lady Bing. Yeah, he's in the running for Lady Bing now, I think.
He is in the running for the Lady Bing. And I'm not criticizing that strategy because I think it's been the right one in that case, but I just think what we're saying versus what we're going to do, I'm taking the under.
And so to cover my basis a little bit, I will say that this government does continue to miss out on opportunities to do good things for agriculture. And I think that there are, if you look at kind of the reaction to these China tariffs, I think it has been this is really basic stuff, and it is unfortunate that there isn't a more sophisticated approach to how do you understand kind of what you could do. So clearly, again, I'm not saying people need to be extremely satisfied with them. There's lots of reasons not to be. So, cover my basis a little bit.
Yeah, but two things can be true, right? Like, you can not be a liberal and you can recognize that the current government makes a good choice. So I'm not saying that they have, I'm not saying that they've done a whole bunch of things, but I just, sometimes I struggle with exactly that, the sort of ripping off the shirt and dyed in the wool blue or dyed in the wool red or whatever, the partisan side of things. I get that there is going to be a Justin Trudeau hangover, that there's no getting around that. But realistically, the government that we have is the government we have. It's going to make plans. We should be actively involved in making sure that the direction the government chooses to take is where we want it to go. And simply, saying, no matter what, I'm always going to be negative doesn't really add to the conversation. And the balance to that is we saw Pierre Poilievre come out against a clean fuel regulation this week. And realistically, in my mind, it's a little tone deaf, especially in light of what we're doing right now. And so tone deaf, too, as Kelvin points out, essentially, most Canadian canola growers probably vote blue on the average. So are we really going to sit there and be yeah, that's cool? No, you can criticize your own party's platform and you can criticize the other party's platform and you can support the other party's platform and you can support your own party platform. We don't have to, it doesn't have to be, either or. We can take the good from each and move forward and push for what we want. It doesn't have to be that heart of a line in between the two.
Your point is well taken. I
know it falls on deaf ears. It's fine.
It doesn't, though. No.
No, thanks for making it, Lyndsey. It's a good point.
I think it's a good point.
We all need to hear that more often.
But Lyndsey, I think to that statement, I think the concern continues that agriculture is kind of an afterthought. I just think that's the case still until we see. I don't think the conservatives are talking in the whole press release this week, like you alluded to, like with the clean fuel regulation. It was an anti-agriculture statement of the part that biofuels makes up as a part of that CFR. And because we can't talk about the nuance of that, we are to assume you are trying to also kill biofuels until you tell us otherwise. Like, I don't know what else to take out of that. But I also need to see some action out of the Carney government where we feel that, hey, we're taking agriculture serious too. And I haven't seen that.
And what I'm waiting for is for Minister McDonald to say, here's what our vision for Canadian agriculture and agri-food is. And we don't have that. Again, I think if you look at a lot of what he said, I think in the early days, there was the sense that he's a minister that's still learning. I don't expect the Prime Minister to come out and say, here's my vision for Canadian agriculture and agri-food. But our agriculture minister should be able to clearly articulate, this is the direction that we're going. We're going to start to see what that looks like when we understand what the cuts are that are going to be made to departmental spending and how they're prioritizing things. But if I was them and I was a political staffer in that office, I would be saying, we need to get out ahead of that. And we need to tell people, this is where we're going. This is where we want to see Canadian agriculture and agri-food go. And
it's not going to be radical. It's not going to be radical. We're talking in like this hyperbole as if we have a history of actually making step change. We're not going to do that. Look, we had Doug Miller from CSJ on this week. He did a great job of communicating the CFIA's pre-consultation report. Okay. And as he's indicated, he said himself, CSGA got a lot of what they were pushing for. Doug did a very good job of lobbying for that. And if things hold, they're going to get it. But at the meantime, the industry was talking about this, once in a lifetime opportunity, big time changes. Let's make Canada the place to want to do business. I think we got status quo.
Yeah, and I think that setting aside the fact that there's this giant conflict of interest in that, actually what CSGA is advocating for is what's in CSGA's interest, not what's in the seed sector's interest and what's in seed growers' interest. And I continue to be surprised that the government doesn't realize the conflict of interest that exists in what CSGA is advocating for, because Doug is saying this, we want more powers. Setting that aside, I think it is a really good example of the challenge that exists where we have generational issues in Canadian agriculture across many indicators, right? We are not going in the right direction. But the problem is we're not facing a crisis. What we're facing is a long-term decline in our competitiveness, in our productivity, in our value added, in our exports, across almost every one of these measures, right? Things are not going in the right direction. And so we do need to see change, and we do need to see ambitious reform. And I think that there is a huge potential for whether or not it's Minister McDonald or John Barlow or Poilievre or Carney or somebody to stand up and say, this is how we see things being different going forward. I don't know. Maybe what we get instead is more Doug Millers who talk about actually what we need to do is protect and entrench the status quo, and we don't actually want to see any significant change. And we want to pass up these opportunities for this once-in-a-generation reform that actually will unlock growth and productivity and profitability in the sector. But I can still hope, Shaun, right?
I watch with great interest as the budget's rolled out and what is communicated around how much this government is going to be investing in plant breeding going forward. I think that remains to be a massive question. It is a topic that if when I talk to people in the seed industry, they're very, obviously very focused on, specifically in the wheat sector where we have a lack of private investment, but we have a strong legacy of public plant breeding that has delivered in the past. The question is, are they committed to it in the future? And that remains to be a big question. There's an example of potential big changes. Again, though, a lot of people trying to hang on to what the status quo. It's there's a pattern here that has.
Yeah.
Kelvin, what did we not talk about today? Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to comment. I don't know the ins and outs of seed regulatory modernization and breeding, the funding of breeding and all of that as well as you guys do. But to me, in all of these situations, the impetus for change only happens if there's pain and if there are layoffs, if there's loss of opportunity, and people realize that. And I think that speaks to a lot of different aspects of the Canadian economy, whether we're talking about tariffs, whether we're talking about the impact on the GDP number that we talked about earlier today in terms of higher than expected drop in GDP. And if that means layoffs and unemployment are on the horizon, that's when things will happen. That's when there will be motivation and ambition shown, I think. And unfortunately, sometimes the hole has to get, or the pain has to get pretty severe before we're happy with moving on from the status quo. And speaking of tariffs, I think that's an issue that hasn't gotten enough attention yet this week, and we've been working on it. But Canadian agriculture manufacturers, equipment manufacturers, we talked a bit about it on last week's show. Were hit by the new steel tariffs last week in some categories. It's been pretty quiet, as I think there's a strong hope for resolution on this at the highest political levels outside of the public discourse, outside of public realm. But it's something that is certainly taking a toll on some Canadian ag manufacturing brands, and expecting that unless we see some resolution again at the highest levels, this could lead to some layoffs and that type of thing in our industry, and that's not good. So I'm curious how much longer it stays quiet before it boils into the more public discussion about this.
Yeah, and one of the challenges there too, and there are other examples, is the on again, off again, right? That also, and that ebb and flow creates a lot of uncertainty, and so that what happens is people say, I'm not going to do business cross border because I can't afford the uncertainty of, I've sold this today, but in 2 weeks there potentially is a tariff. That's going to create a lot of friction between me and my customer, me as my supplier. So therefore, I look for other options, and that's showing up in some of those economic numbers.
Certainly, that's one of the factors behind our declining GDP last quarter, I'd say, overall for the Canadian economy in terms of a chilling effect. And we've talked about this in the past, how people are afraid to speak up against the Trump administration or against they don't want the wrath of the Trump administration, and we see that chilling effect all over in the U.S. But I think it extends north of the border too, in terms of businesses and interests not wanting to be in the sights of such a powerful movement that is running the U.S. government over the last, since January.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, good observation, Lyndsey. What's something we didn't cover this week or today?
I already told you, Taylor Swift's engagement.
Oh, come on.
That's the most important thing. No, I actually, one of the things, of course, it's not really going to make news, and I know Ontario is not the biggest growing region, but it actually started to rain this week here in Ontario. And for a lot of people, especially along the river in the Lyndsey, Peterborough area, they have been incredibly impacted by drought, like an actual drought. It did not rain for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks. We do have people with livestock that, wells are dry. There's no pasture left. We've had full crop write-off of corn, soybeans already in some areas. And so it rained all day yesterday, like a good soaking actual rain for huge portions of the province. It's too late for some crops, or there's already a yield hit that's baked in for some. But I will say, as a livestock producer, it is really nice to have some rain back to freshen and green things up with still fall ahead of us. And it really, for a lot of us with livestock, it's a bit of a sigh of a relief, and hopefully this means a return to at least more frequent rain for the fall season and getting us back in better shape for next year. But it has been a very stressful season for many. So it has been really nice. And the sun came back to Manitoba as well, because I know we talked last week about that. Not an atmospheric river, but sort of kind of, that hit some of the areas of Manitoba. So, yeah.
7 inches of rain some areas last.
Yeah. Wild. Yeah, we didn't get that, but at least it has sort of returned. So, big sigh of relief here, for sure.
Well, hey, and everybody has a different context of drought. So
that's right.
That is, what is a drought in some parts is not a drought in others. A really wet season is a drought to others, right?
Yes. For me here in the Ottawa Valley, for as many years as I've been here, this summer was dry. We were not in a drought. The trees are not shut down. yes, we've got dry lawns and those sorts of things. But well, Tyler, I know that the other thing is it's been kind of patchy, right? So some areas managed to catch a rain here or there and then carried you through, and other areas didn't get any. So we are seeing a huge impact on, so yes, whether you caught a rain, but also field history makes a big difference, and field topography makes a big difference. So if sandier or more rolling hills, you definitely see some pretty major impacts. But yeah, I would not call, for our particular operation this year was very, very dry. I don't know that I would say drought, but I also have a prairie perspective. So maybe my bar for a drought is a lot different.
Yeah.
Our alfalfa fields have started to turn a little brown, right? Like that's where they do. Yeah. Starting to be an issue.
Next week, I'm looking forward to. I'm going to be in Lincoln, Nebraska on Thursday, presenting to the Nebraska Ag Bankers annual conference.
Cool.
With some of the farm profitability issues in the U.S. I can't imagine it being. There'd be some grumpy people in the room. A bunch of ag bankers concerned about what's going on with their loan portfolios. Significant losses forecasted in the U.S. Cropping sector, Canada also. Like it's not like it's drastically better here. A lot of talk about the China tariffs, and Canada's not alone here. Just the approach and the messaging is maybe a little bit different. USDA is out today with their August 2025 outlook for U.S. agricultural trade, and the China numbers are really staggering for the U.S. Okay, exports to China are projected to fall from 17 billion for the year 2025 to just 9 billion. If realized, China would drop from the third largest U.S. ag export market for year 2025 to sixth place in 2026. That's behind the EU, Japan, and South Korea. So, Kelvin, Canada not the only one that has problems getting product to China.
No, and the fact that that's being projected in a USDA publication means that expectations are kind of locked in. That's not just a small chance of that happening. That means expectations are there. So yeah, not good for North American agriculture, certainly, and curious how long China can sustain finding supplies from other parts of the world that they have traditionally bought from Canada and the US.
Yeah. Quickly, we talked about this every week, but do we think there's going to be compensation for canola growers? There was more of a push this week. Kevin Hirsch had an opinion column in The Producer about this, calling for it. Kelvin, what do you think?
I think there will be some measure of some kind. I don't know about checks in the mail, but I think there will be some acknowledgement. Whether, again, I mentioned we'll probably see an increase to the cash advance limit or something like that, but I'm not sure what else beyond that.
Lyndsey, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm going with our typical Canadian thing. We'll do something. The government will do something to say they did something, but we're not going to see a U.S.-style check in the mail.
Yeah, Tyler?
And I think it's way too early to know whether or not that's actually what's needed in the situation, right? I think that is, we can't lose sight of that. And I keep coming back to what we're seeing in canola is different than what we're seeing in other sectors that may actually be on the verge of disappearing in Canada. Canola is going to suffer a hit. Canola farmers are going to have to kind of work through this, but they will carry on. And so I think part of the question is, how do you support the sector in a way that recognizes that, gives them some relief, but it's not going to be, we're not worried about the end of the canola industry in Canada.
I never looked at the futures market today, but we were chatting, Kelvin, where we've seen a pullback in the canola future. Soybeans have been weak. Soybean oil's been weak this week, and canola yesterday traded below where we were on the day of the announcement of those canola seed tariffs. In terms of compensation, if you heard John Newton on Wednesday's show from Terrain, we're very likely to see some sort of ad hoc farm program for the U.S. in the meantime until that budget reconciliation to change the reference margin, some of that money kicks in 26. So
our own Bern Tobin was down at Farm Progress this week too, where USDA Stephen Vaden talked about bridge programming to get to next year for U.S. farmers, right?
Yeah. Hey, that's all the time we have. Hey, everybody, make sure you also check out today, download AgriTalk. I'm guest hosting today, so that's always a lot of fun. So check that out as well. If you do have any feedback, send us an email, shaney@realagriculture.com, or of course you can call that RealAg feedback line, 855-776-6147. Thanks everybody for tuning in and downloading the RealAg Radio Podcast. We'll chat again next week.